Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Front Door. I'm Scott Benedict. Today, we're going to talk about what I think is one of the more fundamental shifts happening across retail, and that's how the digital shelf is expanding to become, in my view, a truly omni-channel element of retail discovery for a consumer. It's now being increasingly powered by AI and automation capabilities that are really transforming how product and brand content and creative elements get to market. Joining me is David Feinleib. David is the founder and CEO of It's Rapid, and they're an AI-driven creative automation platform that helps consumer brands streamline content production for product pages, for retail media, and more. And David also hosts the Beyond the Shelf podcast, and where he explores the people, the processes, and the technologies that are shaping modern e-commerce. And David was kind enough to have me as a guest on his podcast a while back. And so I'm excited to now have him join us here on the Digital Front Door. And David, welcome to the program today.
Scott, thanks for having me on. Great to be here.
Yes, in sports, we refer to this as a home and home series. So I've been on yours, and now you're on mine, and we're going to talk about different things, but all related to omnichannel commerce. So I'm excited to have you on.
It's great to be here. The opportunity to have you on, you've got so much knowledge about the space that I learned a ton having you on the show, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little about what we're seeing in the market.
We're going to ask you to return the favor and make us smarter based on work that you and your team are doing. So that probably sets up the first thing I wanted to kind of ask you about. You've really been, in my view, at the forefront of digital shelf transformation, and so I want to kind of start there and talk about how the digital shelf is evolving from simply being a place where a collection of product pages exists on a retailer's website, really to becoming a more complex multi-channel ecosystem that brands obviously have a role to play, retailers have a role to play in making that discovery for consumers even easier and more helpful. Kind of from the view of you and your team, how is that evolving, and is it evolving as fast as we all think it is?
It is evolving really fast, and I think that's exciting. It's challenging, obviously, for all of us, but also keeps it really interesting. There's a few things going on in the space. First, if we take a step back and we think about the PDP back in the day, so to speak, we were all just happy to get an item live with an image. And often that image it was a kind of a thumbnail size thing, and it came from probably a MDM or supply chain system or something like that. And when it went live, we all went, whew, glad we got that up. And there was kind of a sigh of relief from our friends at the retailers, from the brand, everyone involved. Then you had kind of phase two, if you will, which was, hey, I could do more with that PDP. I could have multiple images. I could have videos. I could have content that answers questions for my shoppers. So I could put all that together. And, that's kind of the stage we've been in for some amount of time. And now we're in this new phase where the definition of the PDP is changing, and the PDP is really a living, breathing asset now. That, I think, is the big shift. It's not one and done. I've got content. It's going to be changing, whether it's seasonal, whether it's because I'm learning about my shopper. Maybe I looked at the reviews and I learned something about something they want to know that isn't addressed in my images or my product copy. I could actually refresh the content to update that and address that at the outset, rather than them, waiting for them to tell me what their questions and issues are. And then, so the page, the content is much more dynamic, and you can do a lot more with it. It's no longer just a product shot. You've got images with text, you've got lifestyles, you've got videos, and you've got this changing nature of it. So that's kind of one thing that's going on. The other thing is, what is that PDP? And classically, we think about it as the page on the .com website. But now when you think about that digital shelf, it's the PDP, it's your D2C site, it's videos you have online, it's your TikTok shop, it's a whole set of content, it's blogs, it's corporate material, it's all these different things that are going on in the ecosystem that comprise sort of your digital presence for your product set. So you've got to be thinking about all of those surfaces, even retail media, right? So that all comes in. So you've got this very dynamic cadence on the content, and then you've got a very broad set of surfaces that you need to think about.
Yeah, and you know that level of opportunity creates the level of complexity for brands, because there's now much more to do to bring a brand or a product to life. And while it's an opportunity, it's also a challenge. I think that it kind of brings me to your company and what I perceive to be the reason you created it. Iterating helps brands with creative production. And as I understand it, you guys work on things from images to videos to product copy to ad assets. And I'm kind of curious, what inspired you to start the company? It sounds like we would agree that there's certainly a need. And what problem were you seeing in the market that manual creative workflows were causing, and you and the team kind of stepped forward and said, I think there's a way to fix that and make that better? I'm curious.
Yeah, it's a great question. I love talking about our origin story. When you're building these companies, once in a long while, you get really lucky and really fortunate. And in this case, we had some large CPGs reach out to us. We had worked with them at a previous company and had done some great work together. And that's always, of course, what you hope for in these partnerships. And so when we got that call, it took us about, I would say, at least 1 millisecond, Scott, to say, yes, we'd love to work with you and understand this problem area better. And basically, what we heard from brands and retailers is, hey, look, we've got a lot of content, but how do we understand what we have? How do we audit it? How do we know we're doing the right things to optimize for conversion? So that's kind of understand what we've got and optimize it. And then now with some understanding, we want to scale our production. We want to refresh quickly. I think everyone's always aspired to do that, but help us with some workflows that are scalable, that are repeatable, and obviously for our larger organizations that can be audited and understood, and we can understand when things happen and what the changes were and things like that. So that opportunity in some ways really came to us, and it just so happened to align with all of this incredible technology we're seeing around AI.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I've noticed about product marketing people, and this is coming from someone who's a merchant by training, and it's going to be said with love, but it feels like that brand marketers are always concerned about, you know, the brand voice and quality of content and telling the story the way they want the story told for their product and for their brand. Feels like AI can really dramatically accelerate content creation and updates and maintenances and maybe seasonal updates to a product storyline. How do you strike a balance from your perspective between automation and authenticity, ensuring that what the output ultimately comes away with or comes in front of a customer with, it feels both on brand, but it's also customer relevant. It's answering the questions the customer's really interested in.
Yeah, well, first of all, a shout out to all of the merchants, because
thank you.
you from a product perspective, we come in, of course, we want to talk about our products and capabilities and all that. A merchant is seeing a set of needs across a whole set of partners and customers and so on. And in a couple sentences, just even as an offhand comment, might say to us, "Oh, I've been seeing such and such challenge with these brands." And for us, that's gold, right? We go, "Oh my gosh, that's a problem over here," but for us, that's we might be able to help with that. So Merchants just do that almost without thinking about it sometimes, and it's so helpful. So thankful for that. This question of the intersection of brand, retailer, and shopper is really interesting, and it's always sort of moving. Like you said, the brand has their brand guidelines, styles, voice, requirements, things like that. The retailer is concerned about the shopper experience, right? You know, we want to use the surface in the right way, but we want the shopper to be able to navigate and find what they're looking for and all that. And the shopper wants to find the relevant products and get info and make decisions, and often they're on their mobile device. So what AI lets us do with some workflow capabilities is put the intersection of those together. We can actually design a workflow and say, we're going to incorporate these brand requirements. We know on this retailer, it's these retailer specs. And we know we're thinking about this shopper audience who's really concerned about these aspects of products in this particular category. And the AI can pull all those together. And we might say, strategically, here's how we need you to prioritize those, or here's what the balance is in those factors. But the AI can then do an analysis for us and say, based on these criteria, here's what I'm seeing in your content, or here's what I'm not seeing. You're missing some key imagery or some key answers to questions. And it can help us actually produce content now that's aligned with those three aspects that go into the content.
That makes sense. And I think one of the things that you and I have agreed about for as long as we've known each other is that the best product content doesn't just sell online. It also informs how a brand shows up everywhere, including when a consumer is researching a purchase that they ultimately make in a physical store, also on retail media, also on in-store displays. How do you see brands kind of integrating digital shelf content across channels to deliver maybe a more consistent omni-channel experience where so many of these things were done in silos? This is the digital team doing digital stuff. Here's the in-store team doing on the physical shelf stuff. And now that feels very integrated, it feels like you guys probably play an important role in that, right?
Yeah, such an interesting area. And you've made the great point that, you know, how do you want to think about it? Maybe you want to even think about digital first and where's my starting point when I'm putting this content together. So I think the biggest thing we're seeing is we have teams that were, let's say, thinking about the physical shelf first. That's where the volume of their sales have been. But now in the same conversation, you'll see their thinking has changed, and they'll ask, hey, how would this look on such and such website? Or they'll pull out their phone, right, and say, hey, let me take a look at that and see how that looks, because they're shopping that way themselves, right? They're seeing that when they go make purchases. And so they know that's part of the decision process for themselves and for the for their shopper customers. So I think that is just part of people's thinking now. How do you get the orgs together? We're seeing that come together more and more. Again, to your point, historically we would have seen retail media happening over there, digital shelves over here, stores over there, and those campaigns might not have even synced up. And so you could get an ad showing one thing, bringing a shopper to something completely different on the product detail page. Now those are much more in sync. I think these organizations are doing a great job pulling these together, and they have to, because to run at the speed that the market's moving at right now, they really have to be in sync. They can't just be producing completely separate assets across those surfaces. They're doing it all together. Mobile is probably one of the biggest drivers in this, because we all recognize, and we're using it, how's this going to look on my phone? And so even if you're thinking about the physical product and you're building new product packaging, you still got in the back of your mind, oh, somebody's going to look at this on a mobile device. And even if that doesn't change my packaging today, I want to be thinking ahead to what could I do to help my digital team then build out mobile ready assets, just as one example.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And, we talk about the silos between physical and digital teams. I can recall a time where the silos between the desktop website team and the mobile team existed. Fortunately, those went away relatively quickly, but it's just like, you got to think end to end because that's how the customer shops. I will tell you, David, it probably would not be late breaking news for us to say that retail media networks are now kind of central to how brands invest in visibility. So there will be no breaking news icon across the bottom of the page when I say that. How do you see AI-driven creative and content automation, the things that your team does, changing the way brands approach retail media, not just because of the speed, but also in maybe testing and iteration and refinement, and then measuring how impactful this creative is versus this creative in a retail media context?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think what we're seeing, and at It's Rapid, we really do the content auditing and analysis, and we do qualitative analysis, so we can look at messaging and alignment with brand and things like that, conversion, all using AI. And then we do the automation. Hey, I built this, and now I need to scale it across all these services. And I think the big unlock is a brand can iterate on that now just at a speed that they couldn't do before. We have a partnership with a large retailer. We do a lot of their ad creative for their brands and advertisers that they work with. They will bring opportunities to the brand and say, hey, we need this creative a day from now, 2 days from now, next Monday. And before, that would have been a conversation where you'd hear about it after the fact. Someone would say, oh man, we had this great opportunity, Scott. I wish we had the creative to do it. It was such a great opportunity with our retailer partner. They were going to match our dollars. They were doing a co-brand campaign. Yeah, these are really great opportunities. But, kind of like airplane seats, if you don't occupy them, they're gone, right? Back to school and Halloween and so on, those come and go. And so, but now brands with workflow tools like ours can turn on that creative, can run a few variations, produce it, do a quick analysis, get approval for it, right? That's a huge deal. And then get it over to the retailer really fast. And everyone feels good about it because it's gone through the right workflow. So this speed to market, that's really the big unlock in this area.
That makes sense. And, it leads me to this next question. And it's interesting because both between some of the work that I've done as a consultant with a certain large retailer here in town about the item creation process for any new item, no matter how many stores or clubs it's going into, includes digital content as well as this is the pack size it comes in, and this is the UPC code, and this, all that sort of stuff. And then when I think of myself in the seat of a brand, now that's one retailer, and I've got multiple retail clients, and so it kind of leads to this concept I think I've heard you talk about, which is the content supply chain, the supply chain of all these elements that are now part of the item creation process, as well as the ongoing marketing of that product throughout its life cycle. And I'm kind of curious, how do brands organize teams, the systems, the workflows to support this kind of this emerging flow of not only getting an item set up, but then supporting it with content throughout its life, through seasonal demand periods, through launches at different retailers? What does that look like now?
Yeah, well, first, credit where credit's due. I don't know who invented it, but I'm guessing it was Doug Stratton, who's now at Bizarre Voice, who came up with this idea of the content supply chain. I'm sure many people may say, "Oh, I thought of that one," but I know he put a lot of time and effort into it. And this idea that, like a real supply chain, a physical supply chain, I would have a number of components, and they would go into building my finished product, so to speak. That's sort of what's going on here. And so, you think of all the different pieces that have to go into a piece of content going live, whether that's a retail media ad, a video, an image. Now we have a lot more to work with when we're deciding what the creative is. So we've got information. What are shoppers searching for? What do they want to know about? What questions are they asking? But also our audience for that content is twofold. Right now, it's both the shoppers, you and I, looking for a product, but it's also to some extent AI-based engines, whether that's on the .com site or it's a generative engine. So we're building the content from that supply chain for two different consumers of the content, an algorithmic consumer and a human consumer. So I think the big breakthrough is you can take a workflow tool like ours, put all these different pieces. You can connect to your in-house DAM, PIM, et cetera, your desktop, wherever those assets are. Brands and retailers are often surprised to find that they actually have a lot of assets to work with. They're always worried when we meet with them. I don't know if I've got enough to work with here. And you go, oh, don't worry. Let's see what you have. Oh, gosh, we do have a lot of, right? Because they've done marketing and they had to do item setup and they actually had to do a lot of this. And so you can now apply AI to everything from item setup and populating data in the forms and the APIs it needs to go to, through to the content that's going to go on the shelf, and then to retail media where you're driving top of funnel demand. So it really plays a big role. And this idea of a supply chain is a great analogy on how I can think about the end-to-end workflow.
Yeah. No, I think it makes sense, and it kind of leads into the next question I'm curious to hear your thoughts on. I had the opportunity during my Walmart career to spend 4 years in the international division, and what a wonderful learning experience that was for me personally. One of the things that I took away from it that I still think about today is how brands that operate across markets, how do they localize creatives for the product that speaks to the individual market while still maintaining their brand image that's part of their maybe multinational allure to a consumer. And I'm curious, I would imagine that automation and capabilities like what It's Rapid has are probably helping brands to personalize and globalize and do some of these things at a scale while still keeping the important elements of a brand image and of a product consistent where they should be consistent, and doing all of that and doing it very efficiently. Is that among the things that you guys think about and do for your clients?
Yeah, it's such a great use case. So we've got this auditing and qualitative analysis part. We've got content production. I need banners and images and copy and all that. And now I want to scale that globally, just like you're saying. And there's one example is a very large CPG we work with. They're in dozens and dozens of markets globally. The brand builds out the brand guidelines and also legal requirements and things like that here in the States, in this particular case for this brand. And just to your point, they want to enable the local users and regions to localize that content. And localize means translate it so it's in the right language, swap in the right product imagery, but also it's got to align with the creative that is relevant for that market. So they're trying to do three things, right? Have it in the right words and have it translated, swap in the right product images, and then have it sort of aligned with the shopper expectations for that market. And this tool, this automation and content creation tool, can do those three things. Really quick product swaps, built-in translation. Translation is something you used to write a whole brief for and you'd send it out, and a month later it would come back. No longer the case. Now you just press a button, it's translated. So it's sort of magical in that way. We can connect to their PIM and DAM so they can swap in the right product images. And then we can use Gen AI to say, based on the market that this content is being produced for, I'm not expecting you to produce finished assets necessarily with Gen AI, but visualize for me what this creative that was built here would look like if it were specifically designed for this market. And now, instead of a 5-10 page brief that tries to explain this as they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Everybody can now look at an image and go, oh yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking, but I would do this or I would do that, or here's how that would align with our brand. So all of a sudden, this discussion, not just the tech, but the actual conversation around the creative can be much more efficient, much more data driven. And as we all know with creative, there's nothing like having something to look at, because you say, oh yeah, that's it. And so that capability set is something we're really excited about and just makes, again, speed to market really, really efficient.
Yeah. So that leads me into this last question, and I'm gonna take an example from another aspect of retail and then ask you to apply it to what you do in the area of pricing. Obviously, technology enabled first dynamic pricing on websites, which caused brands some, let's just call it, consumer credibility issues. And then the advent of electronic shelf labels in physical stores both enabled something that was broadly, I believe, intended for good, but it also created some angst about now are we going to have dynamic pricing in physical stores as well as online? You apply that metaphor to your space, and I'm curious, as we look forward over the next few years, are we headed towards real-time content optimization, or an era where perhaps AI enables changes? Maybe it's to a particular time of day or season of the year or particular individual consumers' preferences. Do you think we're headed towards that, or is it too early to tell where technology created problems in the pricing area of retail? Is it a blessing, curse, or somewhere in between as it relates to content and automating and optimizing the development of content?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I would say to some extent, we're already seeing personalization. We've all done a search in a generative engine, and you type in one set of questions, I type in those same questions, and we're getting different recommendations, right, based on other questions we've asked before. So this concept of memory, in a way, we're already seeing some level of personalization applied there. But I do think brands, at least, one thing we're seeing with analytics is brands will say, I've got these shopper demographics or audiences that I'm really trying to build this creative for. Their struggle in the past was, I know what my audience is, I know the content I've got today, but how do I adapt that content for this audience? I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, and then I need an easy way to adapt it. So the brands and the retailers are both taking the content, taking the audience, and then updating the content, the creative, and so on to be aligned with those different audiences. And now you'll see one brand that we work with produce 5, 10, 20 different variations of that content aligned for a specific audience. So I think we're seeing personalization kind of at that level today. Will we see it at the individual level? I think we will see it to some extent, in the question and answer nature of how we go about interacting with these generative engines. So it's exciting. It's challenging. We're here to help. We're very excited about the space, but obviously having the right workflow in place so you can scale it and you can think about it and you can operationalize it. That's obviously super key.
Yes, that, and I think there's a quote from the original Jurassic Park: just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something.
Correct.
It'll be important for all of us to be kind of responsible throughout the ecosystem of retail to say, okay, here's where this technology can be used in a responsible way that makes a product more compelling and feel more personalized to an individual consumer, but we can't use it to deceive someone or change it. And I think the learnings on the pricing side have all given us appropriate scars
to be thinking about. And
you think about it relates to content. Yeah.
And that's why you do have, to your global example, for example, that's why you do have these systems, whether it's ours or another tool, where you can say, Yeah, these are the guardrails, and we're going to operate within this framework that we've agreed is sort of the guardrails for what we want to do here. Now we can unlock a lot of flexibility and creative in that framework, but we've sort of defined how we're going to operate. And so that I think is really important to do up front. We're seeing our partners do that. And then you got to revisit it as you're going, because these technologies are just iterating so quickly. So even the way you think about the framework, you've got to be, keeping an eye on that. So it's a great point.
Absolutely. David, it's been a fascinating conversation. It feels like we've explored ways in which AI and automation are transforming the digital shelf, and how some of these operational elements, this content supply chain topic that we talked about, how brands can use some of these wonderful tools that companies like yours are developing, and still try to maintain that human touch and that voice of the brand. It feels like the shift from digital shelf to omni-channel shelf is kind of unfolding, and it appears to me that you and the team at It's Rapid are really one of the companies at the forefront of how this is evolving in retail. So it was a wonderful opportunity to have you share your thoughts, and I'd love if we have you back at some point and see how things are progressing as the industry unfolds.
Well, Scott, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Amazing discussion. And if any of your listeners would like us to take a look at their content and run an audit for them, of course, we're more than happy to do that. And it's so great being able to discuss these topics with you. It's a great show you've got. Thanks again.
As it turns out, podcast hosts make the perfect podcast. So there's something to be said about that. I will invite the audience that if they'd like to learn more about what Dave and his team at It's Rapid AI are doing, we'll put up on the screen link to their website. I'd also advocate Dave's podcast, Beyond the Shelf. Again, I had the opportunity to appear, really enjoyed it, have listened to other episodes, and you really touch on a lot of really interesting things. So, David, thank you so much for joining us, and had a great conversation.
Thanks, Scott.
All right. That's it for now. For the Digital Front Door, I'm Scott Benedict.